My son was in agony and needed my kidney. My daughter-in-law, in a voice as sharp and cold as the surgical steel I would soon be lying on, told me, "It's your duty. You're his mother." The finality in her tone left no room for argument, no space for the fear that was already coiling in my gut. The doctor was already scrubbing in the medical team, moving with a quiet efficiency that felt both reassuring and terrifying. They were all ready to operate on me, to take a piece of me to save my son. But then, in a sudden chaotic burst of sound and motion, the doors to the operating room flew open. My 9-year-old grandson Mario came running into that sterile, silent room and yelled a single word that stopped everything, "Grandma." His voice, trembling but piercing, cut through the low hum of the machines. "I'll tell the truth about why my dad really needs your kidney." In that instant, the entire medical team froze, their hands hovering over instruments, their eyes wide with disbelief. The world simply stopped turning. Before I pull you deeper into the heart-stopping silence of that room, into the story of how my world was shattered and then rebuilt, I want to ask you something. If you believe that truth, no matter how painful, is a light that must be allowed to shine, please type truth in the comments below. And if this story resonates with you, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button, because I need you to stay with me until the very end. The most shocking revelations are often hidden in the final moments, and trust me, you will want to be here for this one. Now take my hand and come back with me. I'm lying on the cold steel of that operating table, a prisoner under the intense, blinding glare of the surgical lamp. The light is a merciless white sun, so bright I want to squeeze my eyes shut with all my might, but my body refuses to obey. Every muscle is locked, not from the chill in the air, but from a suffocating, crushing feeling, as if the hands of fate itself are wrapped around my neck, squeezing the very life out of me. The heart monitor is a constant, steady metronome in the background, beep, beep, but its rhythm is no comfort. Each beat is a hammer striking my skull, a relentless reminder of the choice I have made. My senses are heightened to an unbearable degree. I can hear every minute sound in the room with a terrifying crystal clarity. I hear the delicate metallic clinking of surgical instruments as the nurse arranges them on a tray, the soft rustle of paper as Dr. Evans, the head surgeon, reviews my file one last time, and even the faint conspiratorial whispers from the other side of the glass partition, where my daughter-in-law Rebecca stands with her parents. I struggle to lift my gaze toward that opaque glass, a barrier between my world and hers. There she is, Rebecca, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her stare as sharp and unforgiving as a razor blade. She is whispering something to her parents, her head tilted slightly, but her eyes never ever leave me. It's an unnerving, silent command, a telepathic order that drills directly into my mind. Sign it now, do it. Don't you dare hesitate. But the deed is already done. I've already signed the consent form to donate my kidney to my son Adam. That piece of paper bearing my shaky, uncertain signature must be somewhere on the doctor's desk by now, an unchangeable, irrevocable commitment. My fate has been sealed by my own hand. The nurse approaches, holding a syringe filled with anesthesia, the clear liquid gleaming menacingly under the surgical light. I close my eyes, trying to draw a deep, calming breath, but my chest feels as heavy as a block of lead. My thoughts drift to Adam, my beloved oldest son, the boy I raised and sacrificed my entire life to protect. He is just in the room next door, frail and weak, waiting for a piece of my body to give him a new chance at life. I repeat the words to myself, like a prayer, a mantra, to quell the rising panic. This is the right thing to do. As a mother, I have to do it, but the words feel hollow. Why then do I feel this cavernous emptiness in my soul, this chilling, nameless anxiety that tells me something is profoundly wrong? That's when the thunderous noise shatters the quiet tension. The operating room door bursts open with such force that it feels like an explosion. A gust of cold outside air rushes in, making the instrument tray on the nearby table shake and clink violently. The entire room seems to collectively hold its breath. I force my eyes open, straining to lift my head against the straps that hold me tight, and there he is. My 9-year-old grandson Mario rushes in like a small whirlwind of chaos and courage. His sneakers are caked in mud, his school uniform is disheveled and wrinkled, and his little chest is heaving as he gasps for air. Hot on his heels, a terrified nurse chases after him, her voice frantic, "Child, you can't come in here. My God, stop!" But Mario doesn't stop. He runs with a singular purpose, straight toward me, his big round eyes filled with a potent mixture of raw fear and unwavering determination. "Grandma," he says, his voice trembling, but so clear, so pure, it feels like a hand squeezing my heart. "I have to tell everyone why my dad really needs your kidney." A profound silence descends upon the room, once more deeper and more absolute than before. The steady beep-beep of the heart monitor now sounds deafeningly loud, as if it wants to tear the very fabric of the space apart. A doctor standing nearby, startled, drops a pair of surgical forceps. The sharp metallic sound of the instrument hitting the marble floor is like a gunshot, a shocking break in the unbearable tension. I lock my eyes on Mario, my sweet little grandson, the boy I still carry in my arms and read stories to every single night. And there he stands, clutching an old beat-up cell phone, his face pale as a ghost, but his eyes burning with a brilliant, fierce light. What could he possibly know? Why is he saying these things? My heart is a wild drum racing so fast I feel it might leap out of my chest. I want to scream, to demand he tell me right there and then, but my throat is so parched, so constricted with fear, I can't utter a single word. "Doctor?" Evans, the head surgeon, knits his brow, his expression a mask of confusion and authority. He raises a single hand, a clear signal for the entire medical team to halt all actions. His voice when he speaks is deep and sharp. "Whatever you have to say it now." I watch his gaze pass over me, over my vulnerable form on the table, and land squarely on Mario, as if he too is ensnared in this bizarre, surreal moment. From the other side of the glass, a frantic banging begins, making the entire partition shudder. "Don't listen to him," Rebecca shouts, her voice shrill and bordering on hysterical. "He's just a kid, you'll see." But her facade is cracking. Rebecca's look is no longer cold and controlled. It is trembling with a raw animal panic, the look of someone whose darkest secret is about to be dragged into the light. Mario doesn't even glance at his mother. His focus is entirely on me. He grips the cell phone in his small hand so tightly that his knuckles turn bone white. He takes a deep, shuddering breath, as if he is gathering every ounce of courage he possesses in his small body. I want to sit up, to pull him into my arms, to shield him and tell him not to be afraid, but I am powerless, unable to move. I can only look. And deep within my little grandson's eyes I see a universe of pain, and I see a terrible truth that he is determined to bring to light no matter the cost. In that single suspended instant, as the entire room holds its breath, the carefully constructed walls of my reality begin to crumble, and memories of the past flood my mind like a devastating avalanche, memories of those days not so long ago, when I foolishly thought my family was a closed circle, a sanctuary full of unwavering love and unbreakable trust. I remember my old house in Chicago, where every corner smelled of disinfectant, a scent I'd become so used to I didn't even notice it. I'm 67 years old, but sometimes I feel much older, as if time stole my vitality a long time ago. My husband Joe has been bedridden for more than 10 years. He sits in his old wheelchair, its wheels squeaking every time I push him into the backyard for some air. He hardly ever talks. Only every now and then does he let out a sigh, his gaze lost in nothingness. Once I took his hand and asked him, "Joe, are you tired of this life?" He just blinked without responding. I don't know if he understood me, or if I was just talking to myself. That house was my whole world, the place where I raised my 2 sons, Adam and Brandon. I did everything to get them ahead. I woke up at dawn to go to the market to sell produce. In the afternoons, I'd sit and sew clothes for the neighbors. and sometimes I'd stay up until midnight to mend torn shirts and deliver them on time. My hands became rough and calloused my nails, always with dirt from digging around in the market. But I never complained. I just wanted Adam and Brandon to have a better life, not to suffer like I did. Adam, my oldest son, was my pride. He was strong, tall, he worked in construction and always came home with a loud laugh. But in recent years he started to get weak. At first it was just tiredness. Then, little by little, I saw him pale with sunken eyes, and once I felt a horrible terror when he told me he was urinating blood. I hugged him and asked Adam, "What's wrong, son? Tell me." He just shook his head and smiled weakly. "Don't worry, Mom. It's probably just from all the hard work." Rebecca, my daughter-in-law, came into our lives like a strange wind. She was beautiful. She spoke sweetly. And at first I truly believed she was a blessing for Adam. She took care of him diligently. She brought medicine home, watched his meals, and reminded him to take his pills at the exact time. All the neighbors praised me. "You're so lucky, Mrs. Jones, to have such a good daughter-in-law." And I believed it too. Every time I saw Rebecca give a bowl of soup to Adam, I'd tell myself I was just worrying too much. But sometimes I'd catch her cold, calculating gaze, as if she were hiding something. Once I saw her in the backyard whispering on the phone late at night in a low but hurried voice. "Don't worry, everything is going according to the plan." I asked her, "Rebecca, who are you calling so late?" She was startled and laughed nervously. "Just a friend, Mom. Go back to sleep." Brandon, my younger son, was different. He's 26 years old. He lives a few blocks from my house and works as a plumber and electrician. Brandon doesn't talk much, but every time he came to visit, he'd always bring something to eat, sometimes some oranges, other times some bread that was still warm. He'd sit next to me fixing the ceiling fan that squeaked or changing a light bulb in the kitchen. Once he looked at me and said in his deep voice, "Mom, don't work yourself to death like this. I don't want to see you exhausted." I just smiled and waved my hand. "I can still handle it, Brandon. You worry about your brother. He needs you more." But Brandon just shook his head, his gaze full of concern. Mario, my little grandson, was my only joy in those heavy days. He's 9 years old and often came to my house with his little backpack on his back. Mario liked to sit in the backyard and play with some plastic cars I bought him at a flea market. He'd tell me stories, innocent tales that sometimes left me frozen. Once he looked at me with his round eyes and said, "Grandma, my mom talks on the phone at night. I heard her say something about some medicine, but I didn't understand." I smiled and ruffled his hair. "I'm sure she was just asking the doctor something for your dad. Don't think so much about it, my boy." But inside, a seed of unease was beginning to sprout, and then one afternoon everything changed. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. The smell of toasted rice was floating in the air when Rebecca came in. She didn't say hello. She didn't smile. She just stood there with her arms crossed. Her voice was sharp like a knife slicing the air. "Mom, the doctor says only your kidney is compatible. It's your responsibility. You have to save him." I froze. The spoon in my hand dropped into the pan with a dull clang. I looked at her, trying to find a bit of warmth in her eyes, but I only saw a cold determination, almost a demand. "Rebecca, I know I'll do everything for Adam," I whispered, but my throat felt dry. She nodded as if she had achieved her goal and turned around. Not even 10 minutes passed when Rebecca's parents showed up. They walked into my house as if it were their own. They sat down at the dining room table and said in unison, "That's right. A mother's duty is something you can't run from. This whole family now depends on you." I stood there still with the spoon in my hand, feeling cornered. Adam, who at that moment was propped up in a chair so skinny I almost didn't recognize him, took my hand. His hand was freezing. "Mom," he whispered, "I trust you'll save me." I looked into his eyes, those eyes that as a child shone with so much life and now only reflected exhaustion and pleading. I nodded without being able to say anything, suddenly feeling like the small room had become suffocating. The smell of medicinal herbs from Joe's pot in the corner made me feel like I couldn't breathe. That night I took Joe his bowl of soup just like every day. The squeaking of his wheelchair on the concrete floor was a constant reminder that I was carrying this whole family on my shoulders. I put the bowl in front of him. I looked at him, but he just sighed without saying anything. I wanted to tell him to ask him if I was doing the right thing, but he was just there as motionless as a shadow. I went out to the backyard where Mario was playing with his car. He looked up with his bright eyes, but they were full of doubt. "Grandma," he said, "what if someone gets sick because another person is giving them medicine?" I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart skipped a beat. "Why do you ask that, my boy?" I said, trying to stay calm. But Mario just lowered his head and kept pushing his car without answering. What I didn't know was that at that moment I was on the edge of an abyss, and only a few more steps would make me fall. The days that followed that afternoon, when Rebecca came to my house and left me no choice, my life felt crushed by an invisible pressure heavier than the suffocating summer heat of Chicago. I kept getting up early, going to the market to sell my vegetables and oranges, sitting under the dim light to sew clothes. But my soul was no longer at peace. Every step I took, every stitch I made carried with it a question. Am I doing the right thing? Do I really have to sacrifice myself like this? But then Adam's pleading gaze, Rebecca's sharp words, and her parents' questioning looks clung to me without giving me a single moment to breathe. The next morning, when the sun was just peeking out, Rebecca was already at my door. I had just finished preparing tea. The scent of spearmint was just beginning to fill the house when she walked in without knocking, without saying hello. "Mom," she said in a voice as firm as a nail, "the doctor says there isn't much time left. If you keep hesitating, he could be in danger." She put a stack of medical papers on the dining room table, white pages filled with numbers and signatures I didn't quite understand. She pointed to each line as if she were teaching a child. "It says clearly here that you are the only compatible one. No one else can save him." I stood there holding the teapot. The hot water was burning my fingers, but I didn't feel the pain. I only heard the sound of the broom scraping the concrete as I started to sweep the house away to escape Rebecca's gaze. "I heard you," I said in a barely audible voice. "I'll do everything for Adam." But inside, a heavy rock was weighing me down, making me want to scream, to run away. I kept sweeping. The sound of the broom was like a sad rhythm trying to drown out Rebecca's words. But she didn't stop. She just stood there watching me, as if she expected me to agree once more, to confirm I wouldn't dare refuse. When she left, I sat in a chair and covered my face with my hands. I thought of Adam, of the days when he was little and would run after me at the market, clinging to my skirt and laughing out loud. "Mom, when I grow up, I'm going to build you a beautiful house." Now he lay there, skinny, pale, a shadow of what he once was. I wondered if I could let him go without doing anything. But every time I thought about donating my kidney, I was filled with fear, a fear not of the surgery, but of the feeling that I was being pushed towards something bigger, darker, that I couldn't see clearly. That night, Rebecca's parents came over. They brought a basket of fruit, some mangoes and some oranges, but they just left it on the table as a mere formality and sat in the two main chairs in the living room as if they owned the house. Her father, Mr. Collins, coughed a couple of times and said in a raspy voice, "In my day, parents would sacrifice everything for their children. My grandmother sold all her land to save her son. Now it's your turn. You have to do the same." Rebecca's mother, Mrs. Peterson, nodded with a gaze as sharp as a knife. "If you refuse, this family's honor will be in the dirt. What will the neighbors say? They'll say you don't love your son, that you don't deserve to be a mother." I was sitting there clutching the edge of the table, feeling cornered in a dark corner. I wanted to say something, to ask them why all the burden was on me, but I couldn't open my mouth. I just lowered my head and nodded slightly like an automaton. Dinner that night was as heavy as a funeral. Rebecca, with a fake charm, put a piece of chicken on my plate, but her voice was cold. "Mom, save your strength for the surgery." I looked at the chicken on my plate, but I couldn't swallow. Adam was sitting in front of me, his face gaunt and his eyes sunken. He tried to smile weakly. "Mom, I know you'll save me. Just like all the times you saved me when I was a kid." His words were like a stab to my heart. I remembered the days when he had a high fever, and I'd stay up all night wiping him down with wet cloths, or the times he fell off his bike, and I'd run to bandage his wounds. I was always there. I was always the mother willing to do anything. But this time, why did I feel so afraid? Brandon was sitting in a corner of the table, silent as a shadow. He didn't eat. He just stirred the spoon in his bowl of soup, never taking his eyes off Rebecca. I saw his look filled with suspicion, as if he was trying to see through my daughter-in-law's mask. I wanted to ask him, but I didn't dare. The air in the room was thick. The only sound was the clinking of spoons against plates like hammers on my conscience. After dinner, Rebecca got up and personally took Adam's plate to the kitchen to wash it, not letting anyone else touch it. She did it quickly, but I noticed her checking the plate very carefully, as if she was afraid someone would see something inside. That night I couldn't sleep. Lying in my old bed, I listened to the tick-tock of the clock on the wall. Every second a reminder that Adam's time was running out. I got up and walked down the hall to get a glass of water. Then I heard whispers from Adam and Rebecca's room. I stopped, standing in the dark, holding my breath. Rebecca's voice was low but clear. "Yes, after the transplant we'll have all the data. Don't worry, she won't dare refuse." I stood there, my heart pounding, my hands were trembling so much. I had to lean on the wall so I wouldn't fall. "Data, what were they talking about?" I wanted to knock on the door, confront her, but right at that moment Rebecca opened it. She was startled to see me and then smiled falsely. "Still up, Mom? I was just calling to ask about his medicine." I nodded and turned away, but I felt as if thorns had been plunged into my heart. Rebecca's smile, her voice, everything was false, like a mask hiding something terrible. In the days that followed the tense conversation with Rebecca and her parents, I felt like I was living in a foggy dream where everything familiar was becoming strange and terrifying. I continued with my daily tasks, going to the market to sell sewing clothes, feeding my husband Joe. But every action was mechanical, soulless. My heart was heavy, as if a black cloud hung over my head. And Rebecca's words, Adam's pleading gaze, they spun in my mind without giving me a second of peace. But then one afternoon, when Mario, my 9-year-old grandson, came over, the first crack appeared in the wall of trust I was trying to keep standing. Mario came in with his sneakers stained with mud, and his little hands still sticky from art class paint. He left his old backpack in a corner, sat on the floor, and took out the plastic car I had bought him at the flea market last year. I looked at him, trying to smile, but my mind was in a jumble. Mario had always been a little light in my dark days, with his innocent stories and his crystalline laugh. But that day he didn't smile. He pushed the car back and forth on the floor with a lost look. And suddenly he lifted his head and stared at me. "Grandma," he said in a low but clear voice, "what if my dad isn't sick because of life, but because someone is giving him medicine on purpose?" I was startled, as if I had been slapped. The spoon in my hand almost fell, but I managed to hold on to it, trembling. "Why do you say that, Mario?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, but my heart was pounding. I looked into his eyes, so clear but full of a worry that seemed too big for his age. Mario didn't answer right away. He lowered his head and kept playing with his car, but I saw him clench his hand as if he were holding something back. I wanted to hug him to ask him more, but I only managed a nervous laugh. "You're thinking too much, my boy. Your dad is sick, and the doctors are curing him." But my smile was forced, and Mario didn't return it. He just looked at me. He got up silently, took his backpack, and ran back to his house. Mario's question was like a stone thrown into a calm lake in my heart, creating ripples of doubt. I stayed there in my small kitchen, looking at the vegetables on the table, but unable to concentrate. I thought of Adam, of the bottles of pills Rebecca always brought, of how she controlled everything related to my son. I told myself I was probably imagining things. Rebecca was Adam's wife, She loved him. She wouldn't hurt him. But deep in my heart, I knew something wasn't right. That afternoon, Brandon came with his toolbox saying he was going to fix the kitchen light that had been flickering the night before. I watched him climb the ladder, twist and tighten things, and the light from the new bulb lit up the whole kitchen. But then as he came down with the old light bulb in his hand, Brandon looked at me with an unusual seriousness. "Mom," he said in a low voice, almost a whisper, "my sister-in-law is acting very strange. I saw some unlabeled pill bottles in my brother's medicine cabinet, and she hides them very well." I was startled, and the plate I was washing in the sink fell splashing water on my blouse. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice choked. Brandon got off the ladder and stood in front of me, his eyes filled with concern. "Mom, I'm afraid what's wrong with my brother isn't a normal illness. I'm afraid someone—" He didn't finish the sentence, but his look said it all. I stood there, my hands wet, feeling as if the floor was sinking beneath my feet. I wanted to scream to tell Brandon he was overthinking things, that Rebecca couldn't do something so terrible, but I couldn't speak. I just kept looking at Brandon, and in my head Mario's question echoed again. What if my dad is sick because someone is giving him medicine? I tried to discard that idea, but it clung to me like a shadow. I couldn't escape. The next afternoon I took Soup to Adam at the hospital. The white room and the pungent smell of disinfectant made me feel like I couldn't breathe. Adam was lying down skinny with IVs in both arms, but he still tried to smile when he saw me. "Mom, you're here already," he said in a weak voice. I put the bowl on the nightstand, and when I was about to give him the first spoonful, I saw Rebecca next to the bed holding a glass of water. She discreetly dropped a strange-colored pill into the glass, a movement so fast that if I hadn't been watching carefully, I wouldn't have noticed. When I came in, she was startled and spilled a little water on the floor. "What pill is that, Rebecca?" I asked, trying to sound calm. She smiled, but her smile was forced. "It's a supplement for his kidney. The doctor prescribed it." I nodded, but a chill ran down my spine. I couldn't stay calm. After Adam finished eating, I looked for the on-call doctor, a middle-aged man with thick glasses. "Doctor," I asked in a trembling voice, "did you prescribe any new kidney supplements for Adam?" He was surprised and checked the file. "No, we haven't prescribed anything new. The current medication is sufficient." His answer left me frozen. I stood in the hospital hallway listening to the announcements over the loudspeaker, but my mind was blank. Rebecca had lied. What was that pill? Why did she have to hide it? At sunset, Mario came to my house again. This time he didn't play with his car. He sat in a chair and took an old cell phone with a broken screen from his backpack. "Grandma," he said in a low but firm voice, "I want you to listen to this." He typed something and handed me the phone. A recording played. It was Rebecca's voice, whispering but clear. "After the transplant, the test results will be perfect. Don't worry, she won't dare refuse." I dropped the phone. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I looked at Mario, my little grandson, and saw that his eyes were red, as if he was just as scared as I was. "I found it on my mom's old phone," he said in a choked voice. "I don't know what it is, but I thought you should know." I hugged Mario, trying to hold back the tears. "You're so brave, my boy," I whispered. But inside, everything was falling apart. Test results. What was Rebecca talking about? I thought of Adam, of the unlabeled bottles, of Brandon's suspicious look, of the strange-colored pill in the glass of water. They were loose pieces of a puzzle, but little by little they were fitting together, forming a picture I didn't dare look at directly. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my silent house listening to the tick-tock of the clock. Every second a reminder that Adam's time was running out. One morning I went to the hospital carrying an old plastic container with hot food. The smell of rice and stewed meat escaped from the edges. Adam's room was white cold, and the smell of disinfectant was so strong I had a hard time breathing. I had gotten used to that environment, but that day I felt it pressing on my chest. Adam was lying there with sunken eyes and a pale face, but he still tried to smile when he saw me. "Mom, you're here so early," he said in a voice as weak as a sigh. I put the food on the nightstand and tried to smile, but a storm was raging inside me. The doubts of the previous days, Mario's question, Brandon's warning, all screamed in my head without giving me peace. Rebecca was already there, sitting next to Adam's bed, staring at the IV bag that dripped slowly. She didn't look at me. She didn't say hello. She just nodded silently as if my presence was a given. On the nightstand, I noticed a small pill bottle with the cap ajar, half hidden under a crumpled paper napkin. The bottle had no label. It was just a white plastic container with some strange blue pills inside. I picked it up, trying to keep my voice firm. "What medicine is this, Rebecca?" She was startled. She almost jumped and snatched the bottle from my hand so fast that it made me step back. "They're just vitamins, Mom," she said with a smile as fake as cheap paint. "The doctor prescribed them to help his kidney." I nodded, but a chill ran down my spine. Rebecca's smile, the way she snatched the bottle from me, everything was wrong, as if she were hiding a secret I wasn't supposed to know. I sat next to Adam and started to feed him, but my mind was somewhere else. I thought about the unlabeled bottle, about what Brandon had said about the strange medicines Rebecca was hiding. I thought about Mario, about his innocent but sharp question. What if my dad is sick because someone is giving him medicine? I wanted to ask Rebecca right there. I wanted to scream and demand the truth, but I was afraid. Afraid that if I opened my mouth, everything would fall apart and I'd lose Adam forever. I looked at my son as he struggled to swallow each bite and told myself, "Mary, you have to calm down. You have to find out what's going on first." At noon, Brandon came to the hospital. He walked in with his hands still stained with grease from work and his old shirt worn out at the shoulders. He didn't say anything. He just sat silently in a corner, watching Rebecca, who was in the hallway talking to a nurse. When she left, Brandon came up to me and took a small plastic bag from his backpack. "Mom, I want you to see this," he whispered in a voice as tense as a guitar string. He showed me his phone. On the screen were some blurry photos, but clear enough to stop my heart. It was Rebecca in the hospital parking lot, discreetly taking a small bag from the trunk of her car and handing it to an unknown man. The man was wearing a black jacket and a cap that covered most of his face, but I could clearly see the bag of medicine in Rebecca's hand. "I took these photos yesterday," Brandon said in a trembling voice. "I followed her because I thought her behavior was very strange. Mom, I'm afraid she's doing something to my brother Adam." I was speechless. Gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The cold floor of the hospital seemed to absorb all the warmth from my body. "Brandon," I whispered, "are you sure? Did you hear what they were saying?" Brandon shook his head, his eyes red. I couldn't hear well, but I saw her give the bag to the man and he handed her an envelope. "Mom, this isn't normal." I looked into Brandon's eyes. I saw the concern and the rage in them, and I knew he wasn't lying. But I still didn't want to believe it. Rebecca was Adam's wife. She had sworn to take care of him. How could she do something so terrible? That afternoon when I returned home, Mario came again. He didn't run or play as usual. Instead, he sat silently in a chair, hugging his backpack. "Grandma," he said in a low but determined voice, "I want you to hear something." He took the old cell phone with the broken screen from his backpack and, trembling, played an audio file. Rebecca's voice echoed, whispered, but clear as a knife, plunging into my heart. "After the transplant, the data will be complete. Don't worry, that old woman won't dare refuse. This result is worth 100 times more." I became rigid. I dropped the phone on the table, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I looked at Mario, my little grandson, and saw his eyes were red, his lips pressed together as if he was holding back tears. "I found it on my mom's old phone," he said in a choked voice. "I don't know what it is, but I thought you should know." I hugged Mario, feeling as if the whole world was collapsing at my feet. "You're so brave, Mario," I whispered, but my voice broke and tears rolled down my cheeks. I thought of Adam, of the unlabeled bottles, of Brandon's photos, of Mario's recording. They were loose pieces, but they were fitting together, painting a dark picture I didn't dare confront. What was Rebecca doing? What data? What results? And why did she say that old woman won't dare refuse? I felt betrayed not just by Rebecca but by my own faith in family, in love. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my silent house listening to the sirens of an ambulance in the street, the red and blue lights flashing through the window like cuts in my soul. I thought of Adam, of how he was getting weaker every day, of the strange medicines, of Rebecca's calculating whispers. I thought of Brandon, of the suspicion and worry in his eyes, and of Mario, the 9-year-old who had bravely brought me the truth. I held my head, feeling like my brain was going to explode. I wanted to run to the hospital, confront Rebecca, scream, and demand an explanation, but I was afraid. Afraid that the truth was even more horrible than I imagined. Afraid I wouldn't have the strength to bear it. I got up, went out to the backyard, and looked at the pale moonlight. I thought of Joe, my silent husband, who could only sit and watch everything. I wanted to tell him, to ask him what I should do, but I knew he wouldn't answer me. I was alone with the pieces of a truth that were slowly revealing themselves. The next morning, I woke up with the feeling that the whole world was weighing on my chest. The birds chirping in the backyard, a sound that normally brought me calm, now felt like knives stabbing my mind. I knew today was the day the hospital would make the final decision about Adam's kidney transplant. The clues Mario and Brandon had given me, the recording, the photos, the unlabeled bottle they kept spinning in my head. But I didn't dare face them. I was afraid that if I dug deeper I would find a truth I couldn't bear. I just wanted to save Adam, to see my son healthy again, even if the price was a part of my body. But deep down, I knew things weren't that simple. The hospital scheduled me for noon. I entered a small meeting room where Dr. Evans was already waiting for me. He spread the lab results on the table, white sheets filled with numbers and graphs I didn't understand. "Mrs. Jones," he said in a grave but firm voice, "we have reviewed everything thoroughly. You are the most compatible person to donate your kidney to Adam. If we don't proceed soon, his life will be in danger." I sat there clutching the edge of my blouse, my head buzzing as if I had a swarm of bees inside. "I understand," I whispered, but my voice was so low, I doubted if he had heard me. Dr. Evans looked at me and his expression softened. "Do you need more time to think about it?" he asked. I shook my head, not because I had already decided, but because I felt I had no other way out. Rebecca, her parents, and even Adam, they were all counting on me, and I couldn't let my son die. Through the glass of the door, I saw Rebecca standing there with her arms crossed. Her gaze, as sharp as ever, gave a nod to her mother, Mrs. Peterson, as if she were sure I wouldn't dare refuse. That gesture gave me a chill, as if they were playing a game of chess, and I was just a pawn. I wanted to get up to yell that I knew about the bottle, about the recording, but I couldn't. I just sat there feeling trapped in an invisible cage with no escape. That evening, I gathered the whole family in my small house. The living room was crowded. The yellowish light of an old bulb reflected on the worn-out walls. I put a teapot on the table. The scent of spearmint couldn't disperse the heavy atmosphere. Rebecca's parents, Mr. Collins and Mrs. Peterson, sat in the center, occupying the two best chairs, as if they were the owners. Rebecca sat next to them, her hands clasped, giving me a sidelong glance as if to make sure I wouldn't back out. Adam was lying on a sofa, his face pale and his breathing weak. Brandon was leaning against the wall, silent, but his eyes were red, as if he was holding back a fury about to explode. Mario was huddled in a corner, hugging his small backpack, his eyes filled with distress. I took a deep breath. My hands trembled as I set the teapot down. "I've made a decision," I said in a trembling voice, but trying to sound firm. "I'm going to donate my kidney to Adam." The room exploded like a bomb. Mrs. Peterson clapped and said in a shrill voice, "That's a real mother. I knew you wouldn't disappoint this family." Rebecca covered her face. Tears were streaming, but I saw how she clenched her fists, as if she were acting in a play. "Oh, Mom," she said in a choked voice, I knew you love him more than anyone. Thank you. Adam looked at me with eyes clouded by exhaustion, but he still managed to say, Mom, I owe you my life. His words broke my heart like a dagger to the chest, but then Brandon jumped up and hit the table hard. The bang made the teacups vibrate. No, he yelled, his voice trembling with rage. Mom, don't you see you're sacrificing yourself for a wicked plan? She's using you and she's using my brother Adam. The air in the room became thick. The only sound was the buzzing of a mosquito around the light bulb. Rebecca leaped to her feet and pointed at Brandon. What are you saying? How dare you accuse me? I do everything for my husband. But Brandon didn't back down. He came closer, his gaze on fire. Accuse you? And what about those unlabeled bottles and those midnight calls, Mom? You can't let them deceive you. I looked at Brandon, then at Rebecca, and finally at Adam. I wanted to say something to ask Brandon to calm down, but I couldn't. I just looked away, feeling as if the whole world was coming down on me. That night I sat alone in my small room in front of the old wooden table. The oil lamp flickered. Its dim light illuminated the trembling words I was writing in my will. I wrote that the little house would go to Brandon and some of my few valuables to Mario. Every stroke was like a cut in my soul. I didn't know if I'd survive the operation, but I wanted to be prepared to leave something for those I loved. Joe was sitting motionless in his wheelchair in a corner, watching me with his lifeless eyes. I saw his hand tremble as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. I looked at him and tears rolled down my cheeks. Joe, I have to do it right. I have to save Adam. He didn't answer. He just blinked and 2 tears fell down his gaunt cheeks. I folded the will and put it at the bottom of an old wooden box where I kept memories of my wedding. Outside, the rain poured, mixing with the sound of my own sobs. Early in the morning, when the sky was still dark and the fog clung to the little streets leading to the hospital, I was lying on a gurney in an ambulance. I was clutching a small fabric bag with a change of clothes and an embroidered handkerchief I'd had since my wedding day. The ambulance siren howled, but I no longer paid attention. The streetlights filtered through the window, blurred like my broken dreams. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe, but my chest felt heavy. Today was the day I would donate my kidney to Adam, my son. I had already decided. I had written my will. I had prepared myself mentally, but my heart was still in knots, as if I were entering a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. When the ambulance stopped, a nurse pushed the gurney down an endless hospital hallway. The screeching of the wheels on the tiled floor was like a hammer hitting my head. Rebecca was walking right behind me. Her steps were light but firm, like those of a guard. "Don't worry, Mom," she said in a low but sharp voice. "After the surgery, everything will be fine." I looked at her out of the corner of my eye and saw a flash of triumph in her eyes, as if she had already secured her victory. Her smile gave me a chill, not from cold, but from the feeling that I was being led into a plan where I was just a pawn without a will. At the reception, Rebecca's parents, Mr. Collins and Mrs. Peterson, were already there. They were dressed up, Mr. Collins in an old but well-ironed suit, and Mrs. Peterson in a bright red dress, as if they were coming to a big event and not to a surgery. They took Rebecca by the arm and greeted the doctors with an exaggerated friendliness, as if they had known each other all their lives. I heard Mrs. Peterson laugh loudly as she said to a young doctor, "Thank you for all your support, doctor. We won't forget this favor." I stood there clutching my fabric bag, feeling like a stranger in my own story. Adam had already been taken to a waiting room. They allowed me to see him before I went into the operating room. The small room was cold and his skinny arms were full of IVs. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, but when he saw me, he tried to smile weakly. "Mom, thank you," he whispered, his voice broken by exhaustion. I took his hand. It was freezing and I felt like crying. "Adam, I'll do everything to make you get better," I told him. But my voice trembled as if I were trying to convince myself. I looked into my son's eyes. I saw an absolute trust in them and wondered, am I doing the right thing, or am I risking my life for something I don't fully understand? Suddenly Brandon came running in with his hands still stained with grease from work. He was gasping. His shirt was soaked with sweat, as if he had run a long distance. "Mom, don't do it," he said, almost pleading as he grabbed me by the shoulders. "I beg you, don't donate the kidney. Something isn't right." I looked at Brandon. I saw his red eyes filled with rage and concern. I wanted to tell him that I had already decided that I couldn't let Adam die, but the words wouldn't come out. I just put my hand on his, squeezed it gently, and let the nurse take me away. Brandon was left there powerless, shouting behind me, "Mom, listen to me." But I didn't turn around. I didn't dare turn around because I was afraid that if I looked into Brandon's eyes I would fall apart. The hospital hallway was long and cold. The smell of disinfectant was so strong it made me nauseous. An impersonal voice sounded over the loudspeakers. "Operating room number 3, prepare for kidney transplant." They took me to a changing room where a nurse put a cap and a mask on me. The cold blue gown they put on me was a reminder that I was about to lose a part of my body. I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw my gaunt face, my eyes surrounded by dark circles. I asked myself, "Mary, what are you doing? Are you sure this is the right thing to do?" But then the image of Adam in the hospital bed appeared in my mind, and I gritted my teeth and went on. As I walked down the hallway, I saw Rebecca and Mrs. Peterson standing by a glass window talking to an unknown man. He was wearing a black jacket and a cap that covered his face, identical to the man in the photo Brandon had shown me. I saw Rebecca hand him an envelope, and he quickly put it in his jacket pocket. My heart started to beat hard. A cold sweat ran down the back of my neck. What were they doing? What was in that envelope? I wanted to stop, to scream and demand an answer. But the nurse took my arm and led me into the operating room. Inside the operating room, the white light shone directly into my eyes, so bright I had to squint. Dr. Evans was there, his face serious but calm. "Everything is ready, Mrs. Jones," he said in a grave voice. "Just relax." I nodded, but my body was stiff. The nurse placed electrodes on my chest, and the heart monitor's beep-beep was constant, but each beat was like a warning. Rebecca appeared on the other side of the glass. She pressed her face against the window and made a sign to sign quickly toward the papers another nurse was holding. I took the pen, trembling. The ink ran on the paper. When I signed, I felt as if I were signing my own death sentence. I looked at my blurred signature. I thought of the will I had written the night before of Brandon of Mario, and I wondered, will this be the last time I'm conscious? Just as the doctor was getting ready to inject the anesthesia, my heart was beating furiously. A cold sweat was soaking my back. I closed my eyes. I tried to breathe, but images of Adam, Brandon, Mario, and Rebecca were spinning in my head. I thought of Mario's recording of the unlabeled bottle of Brandon's photo. I wanted to stop it all, but I couldn't. I had come too far. I had signed. I had entered this room. I could only lie there waiting with a fear that was drowning my heart. But then, just as the nurse was about to inject the anesthesia, a crash made the whole room tremble. The door burst open. The screech of the hinges ripped the air. All the doctors and nurses were startled. Some turned around abruptly with panic in their eyes. Mario came in like a small whirlwind. His sneakers were still stained with mud. His school uniform was wrinkled, and his little chest was heaving as he gasped. He was tightly holding his old cell phone with the broken screen as if it were the most valuable thing in the world. A nurse ran after him, shouting desperately, "Child, you can't come in here, my God, stop!" But Mario didn't stop. He ran straight toward me, his big round eyes filled with fear but burning with a determination I had never seen in a child. "Grandma," he said in a trembling voice, but so clear it froze everyone in the room. "I have to tell everyone why my dad really needs your kidney." His words were like a bomb that exploded in my head. I held my breath. My heart seemed to stop. The operating room, a space that had been humming with the quiet, focused energy of imminent life-saving surgery, suddenly fell into an absolute suffocating silence. It was a silence so profound, so heavy, that it felt like a physical weight pressing down on me, stealing the very air from my lungs. The only sound that dared to defy it was the rhythmic, relentless beep-beep of the heart monitor, which now seemed to echo with an unnatural, jarring loudness, each pulse sounding less like a sign of life and more like a frantic alarm bell, as if it were trying to shatter the unbearable stillness that had descended upon us all. In that deafening quiet, a nearby doctor, his face a mask of shock, dropped a pair of surgical forceps. The sharp metallic clatter of the instrument hitting the cold marble floor was deafening, a violent percussive sound that seemed to cut through the tense air like a blade, severing the last thread of normalcy that remained. In that moment of suspended reality, Dr. Evans, the head surgeon, a man whose composure I had thought unshakable, raised a hand with a slow, deliberate motion, a silent, absolute command for the entire team to stop. He frowned, a deep line of confusion and concern creasing his brow, but when he spoke, his voice was unnervingly calm and firm, a pillar of authority in a sea of chaos. "Let the boy speak," he commanded, his gaze shifting to my grandson. "Whatever you have to say it now." My own eyes were locked on Mario. I saw his small hand, gripping that old cracked cell phone as if it were a holy relic, his face ashen and pale, but his eyes burned with the brilliant, fierce light of a person carrying a truth too heavy for their shoulders, a weight that could change the world. From the other side of the glass, the fragile peace was shattered once more. "Get out!" Rebecca began banging on the door with a furious, frantic energy, the impacts making the entire glass partition resound and shudder. "Don't listen to him," she shouted, her voice escalating into a shrill, almost hysterical shriek. "He's just a kid, you'll see, he's making it up." But the lie was evident in her own eyes. Her gaze was no longer the icy, calculating stare of a woman in control. It was trembling, with a raw, primal panic, the unmistakable terror of a creature caught in a trap, a secret she had guarded so viciously, about to be torn from the darkness and exposed to the unforgiving light. Mario, with a bravery that humbled me to my core, didn't even look at his mother. His world had narrowed to me, to the truth, and to the small device in his hand. He stepped closer to my gurney, and with trembling fingers he pressed play. A recording sliced through the air. It was Rebecca's voice, a conspiratorial whisper, but as clear and as lethal as a knife, plunging directly into my heart. "After the transplant, the test results will be perfect," she murmured. "Don't worry, that old woman won't dare refuse." The entire room seemed to implode in on itself, collapsing into a vortex of stunned silence. I felt my blood turn to ice water in my veins. The air became a thick, unbreathable poison that got stuck in my throat. I could feel my own heart falter, the beep on the monitor momentarily skipping. "Doctor." Evans turned his head abruptly to look at me. His professional demeanor shattered, his eyes wide with utter astonishment and dawning horror. "Stop," he ordered, his voice now as sharp and cold as a scalpel. "Stop all preparations. Right now." A nurse, her hands shaking, quickly withdrew the syringe of anesthesia that had been just moments from entering my vein. The others stood frozen, a tableau of disbelief, not daring to move, not daring to breathe. Behind the glass, Rebecca let out a guttural scream and threw her body against the door. "It's not true. He made it all up. This child is being manipulated." But her voice broke on a sob, the lie so transparent that even she couldn't sustain it. I looked at my sweet Mario and saw him finally burst into tears, the immense pressure of his mission releasing in a flood of emotion. Yet even through his sobs, he was still clinging to that cell phone, as if it were the last piece of evidence that could save me from the abyss. "I have a video too," he choked out, his small fingers fumbling with the screen. "It's when my mom and grandparents are talking about selling medicines." He played the video. On the small cracked screen, a grainy image appeared, a secret window into their world of deceit, There was Rebecca and her mother, Mrs. Peterson, in the hospital parking lot, the same scene my son Brandon had described. They were exchanging an envelope with the same shadowy unknown man I had seen with my own eyes. Then Mrs. Peterson's voice, cold and laced with greed, filled the operating room. "After this operation, we'll have enough data to sell the medicine abroad," she said with chilling confidence. "This money will change everything. With that money, we can launder all the dirty profits." Lying there strapped to the table, my vision blurred by a torrent of tears, I was consumed by a tidal wave of conflicting emotions. There was horror, a deep, soul-crushing horror for the sheer scale of the truth I had tried so desperately to avoid, now laid bare for everyone to witness. But beneath it there was a strange and profound sense of relief, a release so powerful it was almost dizzying, because I finally no longer had to lie to myself. The invisible cage I had been trapped in had just been blown apart. In that moment, Brandon burst in from the hallway, his face a mask of crimson rage. "Enough!" he roared, throwing himself against the glass door to finally face Rebecca. "You poisoned him. You poisoned my brother. You thought we were all blind." Before anyone could process what was happening, before a single person could react, Brandon raised his hand and slapped Rebecca across the face. The dry, sharp sound of the impact echoed with a shocking finality down the sterile hallway, followed instantly by Mrs. Peterson's piercing scream. "How dare you hit my daughter!" she shrieked. But Brandon was beyond reason, consumed by a protective fury. He pointed a trembling finger at Rebecca, his voice cracking with a pain that ripped through my heart. "What medicines have you been giving him? What did you do to my brother Adam?" Rebecca staggered back, her hand flying to her cheek. Tears of shock and fury streamed down her face, but in her eyes I saw no remorse, no flicker of regret, only the cornered panic of someone whose elaborate web of lies had been irrevocably torn down. "You're crazy!" she yelled, her wild eyes turning to Dr. Evans. "Don't listen to them. They're slandering me." But Dr. Evans wasn't looking at her anymore. His face had turned pale, his expression grim and resolute. He turned to a nurse and spoke with a chilling authority that sealed their fate. "This is no longer a surgery," he declared. "It's a crime scene. Call the police. Now." As a nurse scrambled out of the room, the others stood frozen, looking at each other in utter confusion, caught in the wreckage of my family's implosion. I lay there feeling the entire world crumble around me. Tears rolled freely down my cheeks, but I didn't even try to wipe them away. I looked at Mario, my little grandson, my tiny brave hero, who had burst into this room and saved my life with nothing but a broken cell phone and the power of the truth. I looked at Brandon, my younger son, my fierce protector who had been fighting this battle in the shadows, trying to shield me at all costs. And my heart ached as I thought of Adam, my beloved firstborn, who lay in the room next door, blissfully unaware that the wife he trusted, the woman he loved, had systematically betrayed him, poisoned him, and nearly cost me my life for her own. The monstrous greed. I stayed there, letting the tears flow, letting the hideous, liberating truth seep into every fiber of my being. In that moment I understood with a shattering clarity that everything had changed. The truth had burst forth, not like a gentle dawn, but like a battering ram knocking down a door, and no one could ever hide it again. The chaos that followed felt like a fever dream. The once sterile operating room had become a battlefield of accusations and exposed lies. The nurses trained for medical emergencies looked at each other with wide, helpless eyes, utterly unequipped for this kind of human devastation. I lay there a spectator to my own life's destruction, my vision blurred by tears, unable to tear my eyes from the grotesque scene unfolding. Rebecca, scrambling to her feet, clutched her stinging cheek and shrieked. I did everything for my husband, but the words were hollow, the panic in her eyes betraying the lie. She turned to her parents, a desperate, pleading look on her face. "Dad, Mom, say something." But they stood there, statues of guilt, their faces pale and slack, unable to utter a single word in her defense. In a final, pathetic act of defiance, Mrs. Peterson struck the floor with her cane and pointed it at me, her voice trembling. "You evil old woman! You manipulated your grandson." Her words, once sharp enough to wound me, now felt like nothing more than the desperate flailing of a drowning woman. When hospital security arrived, followed swiftly by the police, the farce was officially over. Rebecca's screams of "I was contributing to science" and Mrs. Peterson's curses of traitor faded down the hallway as they were escorted away, their arrogance finally extinguished, replaced by the grim silence of handcuffs. As the doors closed, a strange, profound peace settled over me. I was still trembling on that cold table, but it was no longer from fear. It was the aftershock of liberation. A feeling of immense relief washed over me, as if I had been freed from a cage I never even knew I was in. Dr. Evans approached, his expression softening. "We've canceled the surgery, Mrs. Jones," he said gently. "We will find another way for Adam. You have saved his life, and you have saved your dignity." In the days that followed, the story exploded in the newspapers, detailing a horrifying drug trafficking ring that used vulnerable patients as guinea pigs. The truth was uglier than I could have ever imagined, but amidst the wreckage we began to heal. Adam, slowly recovering on dialysis, looked at me one day, his eyes filled with a lifetime of regret. "Mom, I was so blind," he whispered. I simply stroked his hair. "What's important is that you're still here," I told him. "That's all I need." I returned to my little house, to my silent husband, Joe. I sat by his wheelchair and told him everything. When I finished, I saw 2 tears roll down his gaunt cheeks, and for the first time in a decade, he squeezed my hand. A faint, weak squeeze, but it was enough. It was everything. It was a silent testament that despite it all, I still had my family. And then there was Mario, my little hero, who ran into my arms whispering, "I'm sorry it took so long, Grandma, but I got there in time." I hugged him tightly, laughing through my tears. "You're the bravest person I know," I told him, and I meant it. That night, under the flickering glow of an old oil lamp, I opened my diary and wrote the final lines to this chapter of my life. Blood doesn't always make you family. Sometimes it is the truth in all its brutal glory that shows you who really deserves to be called by that sacred name. I lost a lot in this fire, but from the ashes I found myself. I closed the book, a sense of profound calm settling over me. The storm had passed. I had been tested, I had been broken, but I had survived. I had regained my voice, my strength, and my power, the most valuable things of all, which no one could ever take from me again. And now, as my story comes to a close, I want to leave you with a thought. My story is about the lies that can live within a family, but it is also about the fierce, unbreakable love that can expose them. It is about the courage of a small boy, the loyalty of a protective son, and the rediscovery of a mother's strength. So I ask you, look around at your own life. Who is the person or the people who represent your true family, bound not just by blood but by courage, loyalty, and truth? Take a moment to honor them in your heart, and if you feel moved to do so, share a word in the comments about what makes them your rock, your hero. Because every story of strength we share is a candle that can light the way for someone else lost in the dark. Thank you for listening. The story you've just heard has been changed in names and places to protect the identity of the people involved. We are not telling this to judge, but with the hope that someone listens and stops to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to be silent to keep the peace, or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story is like a candle that can light the way for someone else. God always blesses, and I am convinced that courage leads us to better days. Meanwhile, on the final screen, I leave you with 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you.